We've got the two gentlemen over there, Shannon Hood, flown in from Melbourne this morning, and then from Rockhampton, Michael Appleby from Kingsley Christian College. And I'm going to hand over to them because they will introduce themselves further and also the reason for their interview today. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share. Eric has already spoken about Empatia and the really treasured partnership that we're forming with ACS. We've got a lot to get through, but I really feel that there's been a theme this morning that's been coming through around obedience. And so I just wanted to, I felt compelled to speak from that position because Empatia was birthed a couple of years ago. About 10 years ago, there was a few of us in the Christian counselling scene nationally that felt there was a need for a Christian employee assistance provider. We didn't really know exactly what that looked like, but we had this real sense that there was a need for that. And that had been on many of our hearts for a long time. And then a couple of years ago, we were wondering if God was up to something. So we convened a group of people to pray at our local church. And we said nothing about what they were coming to pray for. We just said, would you mind, we think God's moving, would you mind coming to pray? And we walked out of that meeting with a conviction on our hearts that to do anything other than start an employee assistance provider from a Christian worldview would now be an act of disobedience. It was so clear and compelling. So that's the position that Empatia comes from, and we really seek to serve Christian organisations. When we first started, we had no idea that 70% of our customers would end up being Christian schools. It seems obvious now, but that wasn't our intent or the way we set out. And I have to tell you that senators are not the only ones that struggle in this universe, knowing the difference between ACS, CEN, CSA, AACS. We're coming up to speed pretty fast on trying to understand it and building connections with many networks. But I will say that whilst there's a values and philosophical alignment with many of those networks, the partnership with ACS feels much deeper at a heart level in terms of the resonance with what you are about and what you are doing, and we just really treasure that partnership. And I'm just so excited to say that Ethan's given me a list of the schools here, and over half of the schools sitting in this room are now Empatia customers, and we love serving you. So thank you for the opportunity, and we were happy to accept the opportunity to speak a real case study of a critical incident response that we were able to support Kingsley with. And since then, there's been at least another one in the room that I was just talking to a school about over lunch where we've been able to support. And you guys have gone and had a cyclone as well partway through since our invitation. And so they are the things that we can go and we can respond to in terms of a critical incident perspective. And so this will be potentially a little bit like possibly drinking from a fire hose. There's going to be a lot of content, but I wanted you to go away with a sense of some theory behind critical incident response, which helps explain why we do what we do, as well as the story of what happened at Kingsley. So let's start with the story of what happened at Kingsley. It was a strange Sunday morning not that long ago, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. So before school starts, it was the 19th of January, actually. Sorry, I didn't pick that up, but earlier. So our teachers come back a week before the students do, and it was the Sunday before the teachers came back. So I was my last day of being in summer mode. When I'm in summer mode, I go to church in shorts and thongs. Sort of gives off the vibe, don't talk to me about school yet. And I knew I would have to think about school that afternoon, but I was just not in that mindset at church that morning. But a lady came up to me and she said, have you heard about Xander? And I said, no, what do you mean? And she said, he took his life on the weekend. And I said, like some expression of shock. I can't remember exactly what I said. And I said, are you sure? Because there was not something that was expected at all. And she said, well, because it was her granddaughter was in the same class the year before and then had been his girlfriend for a time. And she said, well, the police came to visit to ask my granddaughter about if she knew anything or had if he'd said anything to her. And that sort of said to me, well, something's definitely happened if the police have visited. So still in a state of shock, the music's starting for church, and obviously it's hard for my mind to focus on anything that's going on right then. But I knew through that, just in that service, I knew, well, the first thing I've got to do is being aware of just the support that's needed for a school going through something like this. I thought, well, the first thing we've got to do is find out more about what's happened, but also to reach out to Empatia, who we'd heard Empatia speak at the summit last year. We had been with Converge International for a long time, but following the presentation last year, felt drawn to Empatia being such a strong Christian organisation. So I knew we needed the help, and this was my first time going through something like this. I know that I probably, as a small regional school, I probably feel like everybody else has probably gone through something like this. And it was something you'd never want to go through, but here we were facing it. And so after church, messaged our chaplain and said where we were at. I might have phoned her actually. We talked about, I messaged her to say, can I phone? And then we talked on the phone and asked if she could reach out to Empatia on our behalf.
Yeah, so we got that inquiry through our website at 1:23 on a Sunday afternoon. And so we'll come back to this case study story, because what I thought might be helpful is just to talk a little bit about the generic critical incident response that we provide, and why, more importantly, why we provide it that way. And then we can go back and hear how did that manifest itself at Kingsley. And we have a short video also for how it manifested itself at another school down in Melbourne. And then hopefully there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions. If you give Michael the tricky questions, and the easy questions to me is kind of how to allocate those. So just to sort of be clear, as far as Empatia is concerned, most of what we do is a wellbeing support service, which is traditionally known as EAP, although we kind of flinch when people say that because we want to be seen as quite different. Then there's other services that are built on top of that, although the example that I'll share this afternoon is a school for whom Empatia was not their EAP provider, but they brought us in specifically to do critical incident response just for them. And you can see that of the many additional services that we provide, critical incident is one of those extra services that's usually built on the back of the wellbeing support. So for half of you in the room, I'm explaining the critical incident support service that your EAP is able to offer, and so hopefully this will help clarify some things. But before I talk about how we do critical incident response, it's important to talk about the why. And I'll give you a little bit of critical incident response theory that you might find helpful and useful in whatever context. And the fundamental principle around critical incident response from a psychological point of view is summarised by what we call the rule of twos. So the rule of twos governs most people, and you can actually extend this beyond individuals to how families and how communities even recover from a critical incident. So I could spend an hour just talking about this, but I'll try and skip over it very quickly. Fundamentally, and I don't know if you'll see that we operate at a level of effectiveness. A critical incident will start and end. Sometimes those things happen are concurrent, but there's other times where there might be a period where the incident is active before it ends. So the rule of twos kicks in immediately once the critical incident has ended, and the end point of a critical incident will actually differ from individual to individual who's been involved in a particular incident. Fundamentally, the theory goes that there's 4 journeys after that critical incident ends, and the first journey, we'll talk about the yellow path, is what sometimes is known of as resilience. I find this is an overused and unfortunately used word, but much needed. One of the other speakers has already spoken about the importance of leaning into difficult things in order to build resilience. And so some people will be unaffected by the critical incident, and others will have a little blip. And sometimes I call that the tyre blowout effect. So the tyre blowout is when you're on a road trip and your tyre blows and it's inconvenience, but within your own resources and capability, you're able to get yourself back up and running. It delays you, my experience had been, it always seems to be when we're on a holiday and half of our worldly possessions are in the back of the car. So you kind of pull over, most of your life ends up on the side, you get a bit dirty, putting your spare tyre on, load back away, and you're underway, maybe 25 minutes. But you didn't need external help or support. Just within your own capability, you're back and rolling. And so most people, 2 minutes after a critical incident has ended, will have a small dip in effectiveness, and many will recover and off they go. The 2-hour mark is a really important measure following a critical incident, because by that stage, your kind of resilient crowd will be emerging, but the crowd will also be emerging that's going to demonstrate, even short term, some sort of post-trauma response to that incident. And that is a very normal and natural and expected thing to happen following a critical incident. So many of you be aware of the post-trauma responses, would be around irritability, sleeplessness, change in mood, maybe a bit teary, all of those kinds of things happen, all very, very normal. And what we're looking for is the key 2 in the rule of 2s is at the 2-day mark, most people who are going to head towards a healthy recovery journey will have turned a corner. So that's kind of a key factor that we're looking for in critical incident theory, is that, the day after something happens, someone might say, oh, last night was pretty wretched and I couldn't stop thinking about it. But on day 3 and 4 and 5, the symptoms might still be there, but they are improving. And what we're then looking for is at the 2-week mark, we're expecting that the vast majority of people have returned to prior pre-incident functional level. And by 2 months, we're expecting to see post-traumatic growth. That's what we're aiming for. And so one of the other, the 2 other alternatives are the succumbing journey, where someone dips down and never actually has an upturn. And often, what the theory goes, that ends in someone taking their own life. Very, very rare following a critical incident. Tragic when it happens. Many of you, I'm sure, by show of hands, would have heard of PTSD. Like, people heard of that? So many people heard of PTSD. Who's heard of post-traumatic growth? 1 person, 2 people. And so we would say that what we're striving to do within Empatia, and what critical incident theory is trying to do, is not just minimise the harm, but actually maximise the growth. That's what we're aiming for. So if someone is going to go through that traumatic experience, we want to be doing whatever we can at both an individual and community level to say, let's strive for post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth, research shows, usually takes one of 5 categories. So it's often where people who experience post-traumatic growth see a reset in their priorities of life. They reshape those in a way that they find more comfortable and are happier about. Usually people who experience post-traumatic growth will demonstrate some greater sense of gratitude and appreciation for life. The roses smell a little sweeter. The things that happen that they would have maybe seen go through to the keeper before, now they pause and go, wow, I'm so thankful for that. And previously I might not have. Often values change, and particularly the common value change that people experience is a re-emphasis on relationships. That's a very common post-traumatic growth experience. Many people, a post-traumatic growth experience is energy for change. So where we see this is in so many foundations in Australia, the Rosie Batty Foundation, the McGrath Foundation, the list is countless of people who have gone through a traumatic experience. And one of the things that now they see as their growth is they've got this passion and fervour and energy to make a difference, to do something different. I worked in Canberra, which is where I met Paul and Eric, for an organisation based in Canberra that was founded by a mother who lost her son as an apprentice in the construction industry to suicide. And she used that passion to establish an organisation focusing on men's health in the construction industry. Great example of post-traumatic growth. And fascinating, I find, for coming from an overtly Christian worldview, is that secular psychology has demonstrated that one of the 5 characteristics of post-traumatic growth is a rediscovery of spirituality. And so any of you who are familiar, for example, with Stan Grant's story, and you dig into some of his message, he will be talking about his rediscovery post his really difficult time at the ABC in this space. So what we're aiming for, without going into a lot of detail around this, you can kind of get the concept, and it will make clear why we do what we do in the critical incident world from an Empatia point of view, that the key rule of two's turning point is that 2 days mark. So keep that in your mind, and we'll come back to this slide in just a moment. There's also a reality that critical incident response and disaster response isn't just an entity in itself, but most models, and this is the model from the Australian Institute of Disaster Resilience, this is their emergency management cycle. There's 1,000 variants on this, but they all look much the same, and they're all basically defined that a critical incident response is the first stage, and once response has finished, individuals and communities head into recovery, ideally. And after recovery, and so that's usually at that 2-week mark, if it's depending on the nature of the incident, then a healthy emergency management cycle will start to look at prevention activities. We'll review the incident and say, how could we prevent that from ever happening again? Sometimes there's nothing you can do to prevent it from happening, and so you go into the 4th stage, which is preparedness, to say, what can we do? We've done everything we can to prevent it happening. What can we do to prepare for next time round? And I was really struck, because I live life looking at this lens sometimes, I really enjoyed the tour where I saw the flood mitigation gates, and I thought this cycle, of course, doesn't just apply to communities and individuals and schools, but this also applies to us as individuals in terms of our psychological recovery from critical incidents. And so we're trying to do this as much as we can. And so if you overlay these two models, you can see very importantly that the Empatia focus on critical incident is a 4-day focus beginning, so where day 1 is after the critical incident has ended. So one of the things we can do is we can actually support you mid-incident if it's a prolonged incident, and then we will support you for 4 days after the incident's ended. And the reason those 4 days are so critical is we want to have 2 days either side of that day 2 turning point. And what we do in the first phase, the first 2 days, is very different to the strategy that we bring in the second 2 days. And the second 2 days post-incident is when we're starting to hopefully see those who are trending towards a growth or resilience return, and we're starting to identify those who might be heading down an impairment path, and we're putting an end to that as early as possible. So our initial response, I'll explain it in just a moment, but the theory that sits behind the 4 days is this rule of twos theory that applies to psychological recovery following a critical incident. I know I'm jumping through this very quickly. If you've got questions about this, I'm very happy to tackle those at the end. So, with that in mind, I'll ask Michael in a moment to talk about his experience of what we talk about as the response planning call, but this is basically how that event on 19th of January, not December, thank you, panned out. So Alicia completed her critical incident form on our website at 23 minutes past 1, and at 26 minutes past 1, we initiated a phone call back to her to say, you've just reached out on the form on a Sunday afternoon. What is it that's happened? How can we help you? That was taken by our admin team who gathered all the details, and then what we do at Empatia is we have a number of us that are uniquely trained as Empatia incident coordinators. So our admin person, by 1:48, had determined that I was going to be the incident coordinator and had allocated me and sent an email back to Kingsley to say, your incident coordinator for this incident will be Shannon, and here's his mobile number and contact details. You can reach out to him from now on for the next 4 days. I then take that and I figure out what are the pragmatic options for supporting a school up in Rockhampton. And so we start looking at flights, we look at our network of over 100 consultants around the country and say, who can we get there? How quickly can we get them there? What are some pragmatic options that we can come to? And so I've got those in the kit bag. And then at 2:28, I contacted Kingsley and said, okay, we've got some options together, let's arrange a phone call. And so Alicia and Michael and I had a response planning call that was scheduled at 5 that afternoon, on Sunday afternoon. And in between time, and we do this for each of our responses, I emailed Kingsley what we call the critical incident prompts. So it's a checklist to go through immediately after the incident, in the first 24 hours, in the first 48 hours, in the first 96 hours. These are the things as a school leader you should be thinking about. Some might not be relevant, but if you work through the prompts, you'll have a lot of those things covered. Also, a note on what to say if you're contacted by media, if you need to put out a communication to the school, if you need to speak in a staff meeting. Here's some things to think about, and included in that are even some scripts that you can sort of take and adapt and use for yourself. So Michael had that at his disposal if he wanted it. And then we talk about, these are the various options that we're going to talk to you about in a moment, and the costs. And so with that in mind, we had our response planning call. How was that for you?
Well, first of all, I was just blown away that we could have that meeting on a Sunday afternoon. The response time was just so quick, and it was absolutely what I needed, what we needed, because we had a guest speaker for our professional development flying up from Melbourne. I was having dinner with him that night, but I'm thinking, Shannon, what do we do? Do we keep going with the PD program, or do we just scrap all that? What do we do? Because I don't want to be. On one hand, we're paying a lot of money for this speaker, but on the other hand, I don't want to be heartless, and I'm just forget the money, just ready to scrap it. But Shannon said to me, "No, look, it's actually better for the teachers if we maintain routine." And so, all right, okay, that's good to know. And we're still at a stage where we actually haven't got confirmation from the family or anything like that. So we actually, in that meeting, was able to develop a strategy of what I was going to say at the start of the day, and part of the advice that Shannon was able to provide was always tell people the next time they're going to get information. So we said at the beginning of the day, there's been a tragedy in our community, but we're just clarifying the details around that, and we'll have information at lunchtime. So there was a process going on, and I just feel so grateful for Shannon being able to provide that as our incident coordinator, just being able to provide that advice, and then all of that, everything in that email with the prompts of what to say, draft email for the school community, all of that was just so helpful. There was peace of mind to know people who've been through it before, able to lead us through the steps. This is what you do. And of course, something that Shannon did with us in every call was he prayed with us, and that just meant the world to us. And I think the other thing I did straight after was emailed Eric, because I knew that he'd be praying for us as well.
Yeah, thanks. So the theory behind what we're trying to achieve at that response planning call is there's three things that are coming to that table. One is we're bringing critical incident best practice and knowledge and understanding, and all of our incident control coordinators are trained with the Crisis Incident Management Australasia approach. So that is the peak body that is the place for understanding psychological response, disaster response, and so all of our incident coordinators have been trained and schooled and very experienced in that space. So we bring that best practice. Then we just bring pragmatism together. What practically can we do given the fact that this is what's happened and you're in Rockhampton? And then, of course, we bring budget and realities, and that's what comes from the school. And that little sweet spot in the middle where those three circles intersect, that's what we're shooting for on this response planning call. What's going to be the best thing within your budget that is actually practical, that's going to work for you? And so that's what we're aiming for, as well as the reassurance and the prayer and the connection, because we're about to go on a 4-day journey, and 5 o'clock in the Sunday afternoon was the first time we'd met. So at that response call, there's some rapport building too as well, if we haven't kind of met or journeyed together. So in the case of Kingsley, so these are the options that can be chosen when we provide a critical incident response. So the core function is that you get an incident coordinator for 4 days. There's a daily review. And so one of the important things with critical incidents, those of you who've been involved, is this is a moving feast. It is back and forth, and what we knew on Sunday afternoon was very different to what we knew by Monday lunchtime, which was very different to what we knew on Tuesday afternoon. And so every 24 hours for those first 4 days, we check in and have a call either individually with the leader or more preferably with the incident management team of the school. So one of the things we coach is to say, you want to think about getting an incident management team together. It could take this kind of profile, and we'll meet with that team every day for the next 4 days to see what support we can provide. And then what happens is, depending on what services are decided upon, the incident coordinator back at Empatia land takes on the responsibility for making those happen. So that's also the coordination and enabling of optional services. So that could be contacting our consultant, getting them on a plane, getting them outbound to wherever they need to be. That's the core. Then there's 4 options for you to choose from. One of the options is what we call rapid EAP. So if we're already an EAP provider, our guarantee is that, if someone puts out an urgent request, we'll get back to them in due course, and then we'll get an appointment within the next 4 days. If you choose rapid EAP in an critical incident context, we will immediately get back to that staff member and have them an EAP appointment within 3 hours. So that's rapid EAP. We just switch that on for whatever period is useful for you, and you can know that and so the rapid EAP service is, part of the value of that is, of course, the service, but where most of our schools and agencies love that is it means that immediately, the first time they address staff, they can say, this has happened and this is a proactive measure we have put in place right now. You can call our EAP provider. They would normally be pretty good, but you will get an appointment with them within 3 hours if you need that. So that's rapid EAP. We can also send someone on site. Now, of course, that's got some pragmatic issues involved. The reality for most critical incident responses traditionally is organisations over-respond early and under-respond late. So a person on site is not always the right answer. And that will be part of the best practice we bring. There's a school in this community who did have a person on site. Something happened, I think, on a Friday or a Saturday. Monday morning, we had someone, our person, at the school ready to support. So sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. That's part of the advice. An alternative usually to the on-site consultant is what we call a hot link. And so a hot link is where we create an email link that you send out to your staff, and those staff can proactively book an appointment for 30 minutes with a person online in the next day. So the hot link has 15 half-hour sessions, and so this is practical for places that we might not be able to get to straight away. You can send that out to your staff and they can book immediate appointments. And then the 4th one is this incident coordinator support, and Michael might talk about some of what that looks like, but that's in addition to the daily meetings. That's support that a specialist will provide at a distance, and so that can look like document or correspondence review. It can look like attendance at virtual staff meetings. So if you're going to call a staff meeting to make an announcement, we can be there virtually to support that. Personal advice and support for the decision makers and the people leading this process. I'll give an example that I'll show a video at the end here, and an example of that was Sue when the student's locker, so this was a student suicide again, when the student's locker was cleared out, things were found in the locker and the principal knew of them and didn't know what to do with that, and didn't know whether that should be passed on to police, passed on to parents of the student, just tucked away. What should happen to some of the things that were discovered in that locker? And that principal needed a safe place to say, I don't really even feel I can talk to my staff as much as I trust them, because now they're involved. You are a confidential, trusted place where we can have this discussion. What do I do with this thing that's just happened? And so we had that conversation. In some instances, we can do one-on-one urgency, like if you've got a staff member who really is not coping at all, you can say, all right, we can access some support right now for you, and the incident coordinator can do that on a case by case. And then I'm sure you've all had position descriptions where that final bullet point on the position description reads, and other duties as requested, you know. Yeah, well, that's on the incident coordinator's position description as well, and other duties as requested. So really it's a support person to the incident management team and the leader in particular to say, we're alongside of you, whatever that looks like, if we can be helpful for that. So in the case of Kingsley, the options that were chosen were rapid EAP, incident coordinator response, and that's when we had our meetings. How was that for you, Michael?
Yeah, so I guess one of the parts of this process was we did have that opportunity to process, I had some opportunity to process things before I had to speak to staff, and then staff had an opportunity to process things before they were with students. And so we weren't sure how it was going to go with staff, but we didn't think we needed, we were offered someone to get a counsellor up there the next day. We just thought, we're not sure we're going to need that straight off, but the rapid EAP just sounded like a really good option that we could say this to our staff and give them that option. And definitely the EIC support is exactly what we were needing. So in all my, I've got various strengths. One of my weaknesses that I keep trying to improve is my emotional intelligence. And so just when it comes to communicating to staff and community, I really needed that help to get those emails right. Shannon proofread them for me. I remember one day I had proposed a subject heading in an email that was, I found out from Shannon's feedback, just totally wrong. So very grateful, just so grateful for that, because I can so easily, unintentionally, make it worse than what we needed to. So just having that help with the emotional intelligence side of things to be able to communicate and do what we need to do as a leadership. And so for us, our head teacher, Jackie Toohey, some of you might know her, our chaplain, Alicia. So Alicia and I were in the original meeting, but then from that point, it was the three of us who were in meetings with Shannon. And I know that support for our chaplain was immensely helpful, and also for Jackie, just being able to pray together with Shannon each day. Those meetings were helpful for us and ultimately the whole team. Through that support also, our first question, we weren't thinking of ourselves, we were thinking of how do we support the students through this, and so Shannon was able to give advice on how to access the best support for our students when they came back the next week. And just all of the things, like pro tips, I guess, lessons learnt from other schools, do this, don't do this, and all the things we needed to hear.
Thank you. So that's an example from Kingsley. I thought it would be helpful perhaps to share a second example. And so this is a response that we did last year at Geelong Lutheran College. And just as a different kind of comparison, so Geelong, they chose the on-site consultant with the EIC support option as their kind of preferred model for their particular incident response. And so we've just got a video here from Sue Ellis about her experience in terms of the critical incident response as the executive principal.
G'day Sue, thank you so much for making this video for us. You're the executive principal at Geelong Lutheran College. Tell us a little bit about the school and the incident that you experienced last year.
Thanks, Shannon. Geelong Lutheran College is a dual campus school, and we have nearly 1,400 children across the two campuses. And at our Armstrong Creek campus, which is a prep to Year 12 campus, in October last year, we had one of our Year 7 students die by suicide. Early one morning we were advised of that, and our EAP service didn't respond to us, and so just through people that we knew, we were given the phone number of Empatia, and within 10 minutes we'd had a phone call, and we had information forwarded to us to assist us navigate the very challenging few days and weeks and now months afterwards.
And what difference do you feel that the critical incident response made to the staff of the school?
Well, as far as managing the staffs, we needed to provide support for the staff. BU was the program that we used that had a lot of the response, like the ways of doing things. But what we were missing was that really critical care factor on a one-to-one basis. And what Empatia did was come in, help us set up a couple of rooms and provide counselling. We had additional staff come in that were able to relieve teachers either all day or for short periods of time, depending on what their need was. Similarly, they were able to give us advice on how to help support the students. Again, we had lots of good support through BU and our own wellbeing team, but they needed support as well. They were the carers caring for others, and so it just broadened our horizons as far as who was here and what support they could give. And of course, Empatia was that step away, and so could come in with a different perspective and a different way of thinking without the emotional attachment that we were all feeling at the time. For me in particular, leading the team, it was really important, and I know that I valued the time that I had with you and being able to talk through where else I need to look and who else I need to be aware of, because you can get very focused on a whole lot of different things. So it was good for me to be able to stay in the balcony and not on the dance floor, as it were, in that time, but also providing some self-care and support for me as well, which was really valuable at the time then, and also moving forward into those more challenging weeks. But you know, as executive principal, I had to care for our team. I had to care for the teachers in that year level. I had to care for the family. I had to care for the younger siblings and their teachers and their families. Also for the families of the siblings, friends of the siblings, you know, with what to say, what not to say, information for the community about how to speak to their children about this situation. It was multifaceted approach was needed, and it was lovely to be able to rely on that conversation and that support during that time, and also just things with like letter writing. I know I sent forward a number of communications to get some feedback on, which was really valuable. So yeah.
Great. And hypothetically, Sue, if this video were being played to a group of principals at a conference, what would you have to say to them?
I can't speak highly enough of the support that we had then, and that we're using now, that we're utilising Empatia again. The fact that it's a Christian-based organisation made a big difference for us, and I know that that's not every school that you'd be working in, but for us it made a difference. It helped us feel like you understood who we were and not just what we did, and that was really important to me. But I would say reach out and speak and have these people come in and get to know you and let you get to know them, because it could be a very powerful alliance. And I would never want anyone to go through what we went through. The reality is, though, bigger schools do have these situations, but to have somebody walk alongside you during those times of real dark days and dark nights it makes a big difference, and we were truly appreciative of the support that we had then and continue to have now.
Thank you, Sue.
Probably the thing that sticks with me, and with is Sue's comment that we don't just understand what they do but who they are, and that's become a real kind of thing we circulated that in the office and said that's what it means for us to be a Christian organisation, to be working and supporting, and I find that very touching and powerful. I guess the other thing we wanted to mention is that, of course, there's the response that we've described in the bottom right-hand corner immediately following an incident, but what we would like to think is that there's a service that goes beyond that covers the full cycle. So in the recovery stage, then in some places we've accentuated the wellbeing support for affected staff, and we have supervision and executive coaching for leaders on an ongoing basis. In the prevention space, one of the things that's interesting, so just on Tuesday this week, I was down at Geelong, because since that suicide, they've had a spate of non-suicidal self-injury incidents in the school, and so we were running a staff meeting, a training at the staff meeting on how to respond to non-suicidal self-injury that's very intentionally focused on the idea of being a preventative measure for there being further deaths by suicide in the school. So that's an activity there. And then there's elements of preparedness and training. So at Plenty Valley Christian College, we're doing some critical incident training for their staff to help their staff respond to critical incidents better. There can be process and policy review. And then a preparedness step that I thought you might want to speak to, Michael, is the role of the link consultant, which kind of wasn't in place then.
Yeah, so I guess when we first signed up to Empatia, look, our experience with the previous provider was something that we had signed up to knowing it's good to have that support for staff if it's needed, but from the reports we were getting, it really wasn't being used. And so when we signed up with Empatia, we thought, look, it's great we're doing this with a Christian organisation, but we didn't see the need for a link consultant, so that would be somebody who would visit the school on occasions through the year and speak at a staff meeting or PD session, that sort of thing. I probably just didn't see the need for it at the start when we were signing up last year, but I guess through this experience, could see, okay, had we had a link consultant, that's somebody who was already familiar with the school, that staff were already familiar with them, that would have, if we had wanted someone on site, then that would have been that person. And so through this experience, I could see the value of the link consultant more. And I've actually since found out that since we signed up with Empatia, staff had actually had a much higher confidence in reaching out for support because they knew they were getting a Christian counsellor. Previously, they weren't sure who they were going to get, and just knowing they had that shared faith. And ultimately, we know we need to keep our eyes on Jesus, but it's that being able to have that shared faith and just being able to that seems to have increased our staff's confidence in reaching out, which is helpful. We know that if they need to reach out, it's really good to know that they're going to do that if we've actually got that service there. So our we've now increased our package to include the link consultant, and our first visit from the link consultant will be on Monday next week. So they'll be coming to staff room, and when just talking about what to talk about, we thought, well, why don't we talk about how do we look after ourselves, mental health and all that sort of thing. And so that's where our link consultant was just open to whatever we wanted to talk about, and it's just good to know that training and from prevention point of view, but also the preparedness is there as well.
Great, thank you. It's been so encouraging for me today. I didn't expect this but I've had so many of you come and say, oh, we've got to know, I won't mention names, but the name of the link consultant, and we have trouble remembering your name. It's kind of a bit funny, Empatia, we don't know, but we know Jeff or Jane, and they're great. So, it's been encouraging in that sense. So, I guess in terms of an overview, that's what we were just looking to share. This is critical incident. This is how we respond to critical incident. But more importantly, this is why we do it, the theory that sits behind it, and also a shared experience from Michael and from Sue. And at this stage, I think we've got about 5 or 10 minutes where we could take questions, if that's all right. Yeah, if that, yeah.
Still one of you, Mike. Any questions? How many schools here have, this is not a scientific way of gathering data, this is just by half wave, have had to exercise their critical incident management plan? Yep, I thought so, most. Yep.
You'd know that as Christian schools we attract a lot of people who aren't Christian in faith but come to us because we're a good school, whatever that means, I don't know. I'm also trying to define normal, I've lost that as well. But when you have families who aren't Christian and they reach out, how does that go when you're approaching it from a Christian worldview?
Sure, it's a great question. And I guess the context is when I think of families, I think of myself as our kids are at a Christian school, so I'm a Christian school family. We wouldn't really usually work with the students or the family members, but certainly many staff, in fact, we've got one school who shared with us that although they're part of a Christian schooling network, 80% of their staff are not Christian. So I would have thought it'd be the other way around, but I don't know how. Anyway, that's a whole other. So one of their concerns, or their question was, we've got staff here. You know, they all have to sign up and say we adhere to Christian values or whatever that might mean. But what will this mean if someone reaches out? And I guess what it first and foremost means is that we will never impose our views or values on anyone. We're all professional mental health professionals, and that would be fundamentally unethical. So that just will never happen. And because we are all trained mental health professionals, and I spend most of my time working in an emergency services setting, and I can tell you that's not a very Christian environment. And so we provide what I would think is very good and healthy psychotherapy, mental health support for people who are not people of faith, and we don't include it if they're not people of faith. So we only include the kind of Christian-y bits. A, if they're a person of faith, because it complies with their worldview, but B, if they want to. And so there'll be some people who will be people who are people of faith, but for them, their Christian experience includes some pain and difficulty, and they actually don't want someone to bringing a faith conversation into their counselling discussion, and we just won't include that. In Christian schools, in kind of the culture of schools like ACS schools, the most common place we encounter this is not so much the staff member, but most of you have signed up that family members of staff members can also access the service, and that's where we often encounter it. So the staff member might be a person of faith, and so might their spouse, but their adult kids or their children might want some support, and they're not necessarily adherents to the faith. And so that's the space where we can just work with them from a purely psychotherapeutic perspective and provide all of that network of skills that's available there. So, yeah, that's very common and useful. Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Yeah.
Any more?
I don't know. Well, I thought it was. That's why I took it. The hard ones are going for Michael. So we're looking forward to a hard question. Yeah. Is there anything you would add, Michael, to the... No?
Yeah. We were asking how do we support the students, or can Empatia support the students? Shannon said, no, look, that's not our scope. Our scope is to support the staff. We were pointed in the direction of BU and Headspace and that sort of thing. So we engaged with Headspace. They were not... Look, all of those other organisations in our region were not as responsive as... It was hard work for our chaplain to get those links made. But Headspace did make a visit to the school, and that was all very good. It was great that I think it was good to put a face to the organisation for the students, and just know that there was people they could reach out to if they needed that help. I mean, ultimately, I'd love to see a Christian service for that, but I know that's not Empatia's scope at the moment.
Yeah, and I would say there's a difference between it being our scope and focus, and it being an area that we take responsibility for. But there is an ethical expectation for us as mental health practitioners to provide need where it is needed, provide care where it is needed. And so one of you has already shared with me the story today of, in the last couple of weeks, we had one of our Link consultants respond to an incident, and one of the things that was mentioned to me that made my heart warm was that even though the focus of our Link consultant was the staff, she was willing to also step in where there was some family and children needs that were happening at the school to support in that way. So we would never say we will be the provider of support to the students and the families, but part of being a professional is that if you're faced with need in a situation and you're there, then you'll respond. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I think we're going to leave it at that. let's say thank you to Shannon and Michael for sharing.